To everybody joining this subscriber-only Zoom, we're going to be starting in just a minute. Welcome to everyone to this Haaretz subscriber Zoom. It is part of an exclusive series for Haaretz subscribers. Thank you very much for supporting the work that we do. You already enjoy access to all of our exclusive coverage. And this series is another benefit for your subscription, behind the scenes, live briefings with our most expert writers. We also have a new perk for subscribers that I'll just mention now. You can send a gift subscription to Haaretz, to friends or family, anybody who cares about Israel and what's happening here. And we will link to the gift subscription page in our chat box during this briefing. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our two experts for this evening. Amos Harel is Haaretz's senior military and defense analyst, and Alon Pinkas is Haaretz's senior political analyst. This briefing will be an hour long. It will be roughly 40 minutes discussion between Alon and Amos and myself, and then there will be about 20 minutes of questions and answers at the end. Now, if you have a question, please send it in the chat function, preferably not the Q&A function, the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Now, what they say about the best laid plans, we had a full plate prepared to talk about the Iran nuclear deal, whether the talks there are really progressing. We were going to talk about normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia, and whether they were about to start a beautiful new chapter in their relations. But as always, Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu has intervened to blow it all up. We are going to mention and discuss those very significant issues. But today was a particularly dramatic day in Israel's Knesset. It was the deadline for the Knesset to vote for two candidates for the committee that appoints Israel's judges. The selection of judges, as you may remember, is a key part of the overhaul, so-called, that Netanyahu's Justice Minister Yariv Levin announced back in January, and that triggered Israel's loudest, longest protest movement ever. That overhaul has been in a suspended state for several months, while Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, hosted talks between the government and the opposition to come to some kind of compromise. It is those talks which have functioned as a kind of temporary ceasefire between Netanyahu's assault on Israel's democracy and its defenders. It potentially is now in danger of disintegrating. The ruling coalition failed to win election to the appointments committee. Its candidate failed to gather enough votes, but the opposition candidate did win election to the committee. Is this a sign of the unraveling of Netanyahu's judicial overhaul and of the Netanyahu government? Let's start now with the sharpest takes from both of our guests, Amos Harel and Alon Pinkas, about today's drama and what it means for Israel's governance and for its security. Alon, I'll start with you. Yair Lapid, one of the heads of the opposition, called this morning's events in the Knesset a sign that Netanyahu had lost control of his government and is captive to its extremists, and that the prime minister is still as determined as ever to crush Israel's democracy. What is your take on what happened today, and who is really in control in Israel?
Well, hello, everyone. I'm delighted and honored to be here. Thank you, Esther, for organizing this. Ever since this assault on democracy began in early January, the government was inaugurated on the 29th of December, 2022, and on the 4th of January, out of nowhere, because it was never in the coalition agreements, nor was it in the party platforms, the government initiated or introduced this major constitutional coup d'etat. And ever since that day until today, I'm getting to your question, Esther. Ever since that day, there has been disagreement or confusion or uncertainty as to the main question, which is, does Netanyahu control all of this? Is he in charge of all of this? Is this some kind of conniving, maneuvering, and constant politicking and gaming of the system? Or conversely, as you suggested in your introduction, Esther, or that he is held captive to the very extreme elements of his government? Now, there are pros and there are cons, there are good points and lesser points to make for both these arguments, for both these contentions. Right now, I would go as far as to say, with the caveat and the disclaimer that it's too early, that we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, that the judges' selection committee's convening was only suspended for 30 days, not indefinitely. But that being established, I think it most certainly represents the beginning of a process of unraveling, because, and I'll end with this sentence, because Netanyahu, as Yogi Berra, as the great political philosopher Yogi Berra said, he's at a fork, he reached a fork in the road, and he has to take it. Either he suspends the legislation, the constitutional overall legislation, and risks losing the integrity and the composition of his coalition, or he suspends it indefinitely because of the pushback and the power of the demonstrations, which have been going on for 23 weeks consecutively, in which case he may also lose his coalition. So either way, I think he's in a major political bind, and what we saw today, back full circle to today's events, what we saw is that to a large extent, he probably lost the trust of some of his coalition members, because as many of the subscribers watching us now know, the coalition is 64 and the number 64 numbers 64, and the opposition is 56. So for the opposition representative, member of Knesset, Karin El-Harar, to actually muster enough votes, she needed at least 5 votes from the coalition, which means there have been defections and conceivably more. I don't know what the final tally was. So I'll just stop here. I think this is the beginning of a process of unraveling. By the way, he can accelerate the process on his own initiative by dismembering dissolving the government and calling for the dissolution of parliament, as he has done 4 times in the last 3 years. But I don't want to go that far right now.
But hasn't he actually achieved yet another respite from having to make any of those decisions? Because now he has another 30 days in which time these elections have to be rerun for the second member of this committee. So is it a loss and a win? Only a loss?
No, I think it's only a loss. Look, you always have the micro analyst, and I say this with all due respect, who say, okay, this is his calculus. He's waiting to see what will happen on the 20th of June when the Israeli Bar Association holds its election for its head or chairman or secretary general.
They also have a representative on this.
They have a representative committee. If his favored candidate wins, then he knows that he can try and create a majority. But he expected, when the morning began, when today began, Esther, he expected this to be postponed entirely. He did not figure that the opposition representative will win enough votes. So you have another set of micro political, and I call them micro because they work on a daily basis in terms of analysis, not a long term or from 40,000 feet above. The assumption was that he wants this to go away for 30 days. That would have been, everyone would have said a con man is a con man, and he's doing it again. And he's only one respite, as you said, but he achieved virtually nothing. The fact that the opposition representative won the votes means that he has leverage vis-a-vis his opponents inside Likud, which apparently are becoming fast and furious, many fast and furious. But I don't think these 30 days are going to be kind to him.
Okay. Amos, I want to bridge to you. You've written extensively about how the Netanyahu government's overhaul plans actually triggered a pretty extreme crisis within the IDF. In fact, causing so much damage that the defense minister publicly warned Netanyahu that the country's security was being compromised, for which he was summarily fired and then reinstated. Are we heading that way again, whether it's now or in 30 days or whenever some other agreement, if the talks at the president's house blow up at some point in the next weeks? Can the protest movement within the IDF reboot its momentum? Can it take off from where it was? Is Israel's security situation different from where it was a few months ago? And will that change the calculus of some of those reservists that were threatening not to turn up?
Hi, Esther. Thanks for inviting me. It's good that you started with the event today, because I finally understood what happened at the Knesset, thanks to listening to Alon. If we go back in history, a long, long time ago, meaning late in March of this year, March 26th was, I think, a historic day for the state of Israel. The day that Netanyahu tried to fire Gallant, the defense minister. And what ended, it turned out to be a miscalculation on his behalf. The way he couldn't implement his plans today, something even more serious happened to him in late March, when just after he announced that he was firing Gallant, more than 500,000 Israelis stormed the streets. By the next day, it was Monday morning, it was quite clear that no legislation would be passed before Passover, and also that Gallant would remain in place. Now, this was done by the public, but the reservists played a very important role because of the role the IDF and combat service in particular plays in Israeli society. And more than anything else, the whole chain of events began with the pilots and navigators. Now, we can't give you the exact number of pilots and navigators in Israeli Air Force, but we're not talking of thousands of people, and more than half of them are reservists. And quite an important part of that group were taking part in the protests and actually threatening not to come to Miluim, to reserve duty, if legislation is passed. And this was the main event that caused the chain of events that led Herzi Halevi, the chief of staff of the army, to warn Gallant and Netanyahu that they had to stop legislation, and finally led Gallant, after it took him some time to decide, but finally led Gallant on that Saturday to speak out against the judicial overhaul. I think this time we're not at the same place yet. First of all, as Alona said, Netanyahu is in a very problematic situation. It's very hard to see what he does next and how he's going to proceed, if at all, with the proposed legislation. And secondly, the reservists themselves, at least the pilots, are keeping a very, very low profile. I wrote about that, I think, a week ago after contacting some of the people who were very active in the protest. And they were telling me, look, we got back to reserve duty. We're not doing anything public right now. We remain alert. If something happens, we will join again, but we don't want to be in the front of this, because we cannot afford to go through the same ordeal again, because the consequences for the Israeli Air Force could be too much to handle right now. On the other hand, there are other groups. One is called in Hebrew, Achim LaNeshek, Brothers in Arms, and these are reservists.
Brothers and sisters in arms.
Yeah, that's true. And these are people coming from all kinds of branches of the army. There's also a very dominant group of people coming from elite intelligence units like Sayed Matkal and others, who are taking a very aggressive, sort of a fighting stance against Netanyahu's plans. But the pilots are staying behind right now. I think part of the issue right now is that there's such a lot of confusion over where Netanyahu is heading and what's his latest trick, what is he up to, what is he planning to do right now. But I think in the end, if this is necessary, there will be more and more protesters, not only the 500,000 on the streets, but also many, many reservists who would, almost by any means necessary, fight the coalition's plans if they indeed move ahead. And I think that the army's part in this, the reservists' part in this, is bothering Netanyahu at least as much as he's bothered by the fact that Biden, that the president, is not inviting him to the White House, or then he's worried about the economy and the consequences for the high-tech industry because of his legal plans.
And I just want to follow up with one question, because, as you say, the situation is quite a lot more chaotic now. And whereas we had a kind of a legislative plan that was very comprehensive and very threatening from the Netanyahu government, now it could be that things will be presented piece by piece, or, as is known from the Polish or Hungarian example, salami tactics, in which case, at what point will people decide that's my red line?
It's hard to tell, and there's a lot of confusion. And, I try to follow this as much as I can, but I'm not a legal expert or a political analyst. And if I'm having these difficulties, then I assume that many Israelis who sympathize with the opposition and the protests cause are still finding it hard to follow it's inside, so much inside baseball is going on here that it's very hard to fathom what exactly are the plans. I think if something serious happens, such as any kind of legislation being passed, that would be a huge red line. Also, one more issue I should mention is the draft law, actually the exemption from the draft to the army. The ultra-Orthodox parties, it's hard to say where they're heading. They would like to have it passed. They were attempting to pass this law during the current Knesset session until summer, and I think it ends in about the end of July. Right now, it's too dangerous for Netanyahu to risk it. But if the ultra-Orthodox continue blackmailing Netanyahu, like all of his partners, he has chosen some very strange bedfellows this time, more than anything else, at Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we haven't mentioned yet. But he needs to answer to all of those different parties that are blackmailing him. If he makes a mistake, such as trying to pass the law that would exempt all yeshiva students, all ultra-Orthodox men from any kind of military service, I think it would cause an outrage. It would push people to the streets. Well, probably a year ago, it wouldn't have caused that much of a political storm. But right now, everything is so emotional. And so much of the public, at least the liberal democratic camp, is so suspicious of the government plans that it doesn't take a lot to push people back to the streets. And even now, I think that around 200,000 Israelis are marching every Saturday night. That's quite a lot. That's not 500,000, but it's still a significant number, and it does show how concerned people are and how willing they are to translate their feelings into political action.
Right, and this week it will be the 24th week.
Yeah, 24th.
So nearly coming up for 6 months of absolutely week-on-week protests across Israel. It's a bit of a sharp turn, but I want to move to Tehran. Now,
I wouldn't suggest moving to Tehran, but other than that.
Just rhetorically.
Mhm.
So there's lots and lots of talk about the negotiations via third party between the US and Iran, and quite some talk also about Iran not just creeping, but almost galloping towards the level of uranium enrichment that it requires to produce not only its first bomb, but second, third, and fourth as well. Where is Israel in all of what is going on with these understandings that potentially the US and Iran are trying to get to? How serious do you think those negotiations actually are, and how likely they are to succeed? And bearing in mind the reports that Iran has built a new nuclear facility so deep underground that even the US's bunker busting bombs can't get to it, where does that leave Israel's threat of military action as a last resort?
So Israel is mostly watching helplessly from the sidelines right now. There are significant discussions between the Americans and the Iranians, some of them through a third party, through the Omanis. This is not a new agreement, as this is not exactly a return to the JCPOA, the previous agreement from 2015, the one President Trump decided to pull out of in 2018. These are basic understandings or a limited agreement. When people talk of less for less, some experts would tell you it doesn't even get to less for less. What it is basically is some confidence building measures, such as Iran releasing some hostages, European countries already releasing Iranian so-called diplomats who are involved in all kinds of terrorist activities in the European countries. In a few weeks' time, if they do reach understandings, the United States would probably push forward an initiative which would allow releasing about $20 billion of Iranian money, which was frozen in different bank accounts in Iraq and in South Korea and other places, which is important, of course, for the Iranian regime. In return, the Iranians would promise not to break out, again, not to proceed to a higher level of enriching uranium. At the moment, it's 60%. If it goes to weapons-grade material, which is 90%, this is a whole different ballgame. If they promise to do that, this is a good sign from the American perspective. I also have to say that most of the Israeli intelligence community is actually in favor of such an arrangement, saying, look, it's not a great option, it's not nothing to be happy about, but it's better than the alternative of the Iranians moving forward and the international community hardly doing anything about this. Netanyahu has been strangely silent about this. He spoke once or twice, but no emotions were shown, nothing nothing which would remind you of his campaigns in 2015 or 2018.
Right, he's basically said we will not allow Iran.
Yeah, we will not, but we're not. Nobody's asking us right now, which has led some observers to suspect that maybe the Americans are promising him something in return, that he knows he can't affect this. And on the other hand, perhaps there's some kind of a chance, a slight chance for a breakthrough on the Saudi channel, reaching an agreement there. We'll probably discuss that later. I published last week a story saying that the Israeli intelligence community now estimates that there's a good chance of the Americans reaching such an arrangement or understandings with the Iranians within a few weeks. Having said all that, it's harder and harder to see a scenario in which Israel acts unilaterally against nuclear sites. One could argue, and I think Alon would agree with me on this, that the chances were very, very slight or slim to begin with, even 10 years ago. But there has been such a constant discussion under Bennett and then under Netanyahu again. And of course, the army is joining in for its own interests. It's receiving lots and lots of money in order to practice and to purchase all kinds of new weapon systems and so on. But in the end of this matter, for the time being, I would assume that there's no real chance of Israel acting on its own. And if the Americans reach understandings, it will be almost political suicide even for Netanyahu to try something like this. Israel has to prepare. Israel needs to maintain what we call a credible military threat. It has to prepare for a worst case scenario in which somehow the Iranians break out and we have to defend ourselves and so on. But right now, I don't think it's in the cards. I don't think that it's a serious option that Israel would strike. You hear about that all the time. About once a week, you can hear that on Israeli TV, the army preparations, the Air Force had a great exercise, a drill, preparing for such a strike. It doesn't seem to be very serious for me, in my view, at the moment.
Okay, just one quick reminder to anyone listening who has a question to send it in the chat. Alon, I thought I would offer moving to Riyadh with you, obviously also in a rhetorical way, just to pick up on what Amos was saying about whether there is a kind of sweetener for Israel involved in the US-Iran negotiations. There's been an incredible amount of noise, especially pushed by right-wing media, I would say, that Saudi Arabia and Israel are about to normalize ties, and really this is the beginning of the new Middle East that everyone was hoping for. There seems to be a lot of manipulation messaging, which obscures the question of whether there really is real progress going on about this. What is your take on what is happening? What weight should we give to the Saudis when they say real normalization can only happen when there is progress on the Palestinian issue? And where does all of this fit into Biden's game plan for re-election and for Netanyahu's desperate need for a big political win, geopolitical win?
So essentially, you have 9 questions in that remark.
Thank you.
All right. By definition, an Israeli-Saudi deal is transactional. And the question is, what are the terms of this transaction? For a very long time, the conventional wisdom was that in exchange for any kind of upgrade in relationship, the Saudis would expect from Israel some tangible moves on the Palestinian issue, meaning to pay with Palestinian currency to gain access to Saudi Arabia. But that was 15, 20, even 5 years ago. Today, we're looking at a slightly different landscape because the Saudis, like it or not, endorse it, reject it, is in the eyes of the beholder. But the Saudis are recalibrating their entire foreign policy. And it goes without saying that when a major power is recalibrating, regional powers need to do their own thing. And this is what the Saudis are doing. Now, oddly enough, Mohammed bin Salman, AKA fondly known as MBS, is even less popular in the White House than Mr. Netanyahu. So in that respect, neither of them really occupies Mr. Biden's, or indeed the American foreign policy establishment, list of 10 priorities. However, part of that recalibration involved renewing ties that have been severed in 2016 with Iran. That has been done via the good offices and good mediation efforts of no less than China, which kind of irks and bothers and annoys the Americans, because the Americans have been in the process of disengaging from the region for the better part of the last decade, even more. It was gradual, but it's nonetheless almost inexorable in terms of the trajectory. They figured that there were only two issues remaining in the Middle East that they need to take care of. One is Iran, and they did via the JCPOA in 2015, and as Amos elaborated, an agreement from which the Americans unilaterally withdrew in 2018. And the other was the Palestinian issue, and that was 2014, the last time the US was seriously and heavily involved and willing to expend political capital. That was John Kerry, then Secretary of State. So what remains now is the Israeli-Saudi equation in the context of the so-called Abraham Accords. Now, what did I mean by transactional? The Saudis are now saying, okay, it's not just about the Palestinians, even though the king himself, King Salman, said last week, without a free and independent Palestinian state along the 4th of June, 1967 borders, with its capital in East Jerusalem, and in just solution to the issue of Palestinian refugees, quote unquote, there cannot and will not be any kind of normalization. Okay, so a lot of people here, and as you said, the media, particularly the pro-Netanyahu media, is playing this act. There's something unique about the right-wing media, about the right wing in Israel in general. They believe the Arabs when they want to, they disbelieve the Arabs when they don't want to, and they think they make a strong case in both cases, in both the instances, I'm sorry. So when the Saudis say this is about the Palestinians, say that don't take them seriously. Well, I do take them seriously, and so apparently do the Americans. And so the Americans have approached the Saudis and essentially said, okay, what do you want? Because a photo op in the White House is not transformational from an American point of view, but is a good thing. Don't forget that with all due respect to American disengagement, the US Navy's 5th Fleet is still anchored or headquartered in Bahrain and Qatar in the Gulf. So the Americans are still physically here. Their mindset is elsewhere, and they pivoted, quote, as they say, to East Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. But the Americans said, what do you want? And the Saudis said the following. Well, they paid the lip service to the Palestinian issue, and then they said, we want the F-35s. We want to renew the entire F-16 and F-15 fleet. And lo and behold, guess what? We want a nuclear reactor for civilian, for the production of civilian and for energy for civilian uses. And everyone was looking at them and saying, what are you, crazy? With the oil reservoirs that you have, you're going nuclear? And MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, referred everyone to his vision for Saudi Arabia in 2030, which was then extended to 2050, which means less reliance on the petrochemical industry and on oil and gas.
It's because he wants to go green.
He says he wants to go green. Now, back to the equation in real time right now. So the Saudis are basically saying, a nuclear reactor, this is what we want in F-35. I'm not sure the Americans are going to say yes to that. Because from an American point of view, an Israeli-Saudi relationship should be in the best interest of both countries, and the US should not be made to pay for that. Not only that, but the Americans are now certain that whatever bragging Mr. Netanyahu spewed in the last several years about an Israeli-Sunni coalition led by Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, against Iran, that would have dragged the US conceivably into a war in certain contingencies. Well, that ain't going to happen because the Saudis, as I said, have improved relations with the Iranians. They're not friends. This is not the US and Canada or the Netherlands and Belgium, but nonetheless, they are much friendlier than they were a few years ago, as are the Emiratis and the Qataris. So I don't think this is going to happen anytime soon. One last thing that I would be remiss if I don't add to this equation, although it's heavy enough, Esther. You know, the Saudis are smart people. There is nothing on the Palestinian thing that Netanyahu can say to them that they would believe. They look at the composition of his coalition with the extreme right wing, he himself, the basic guidelines that the government signed as it was inaugurated or sworn in on the 29th of December, which say exclusive Jewish rights to settle throughout the biblical land of Israel, no Palestinian state, and, you know, kind of insinuating that Israel is contemplating annexation of large swaths of the West Bank.
And Israel has just gone back over part of the disengagement from Gaza plan by
Correct.
allowing settlers to go back to Homesh.
Correct. And so
it's even the idea that, you know, agreements are not agreements.
add to that another component, and I will end with this because I think this is too long. The Americans, let's say the Americans are willing to entertain Saudi demands, because there has been an issue, not just the murder, the assassination of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi that was sanctioned by Mohammed bin Salman, by MBS, but also MBS's humiliation of Biden with his refusal to increase oil production quotas last year. Biden bit his tongue, went to Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, high-fived MBS. Everyone made fun and mocked him only because he thought in the context of recession and the post-COVID, the post-corona pandemic recession, you need to lower prices, and for that you need the Saudis to produce more. And guess what? MBS essentially said, go away, screw you, I'm not going to play this game. Because at the time, he was aligned in the oil realm with the Russians. Since then, we have, the Russian element or dimension is not. But here's my last point. In order to entertain Saudi demands for F-35, for armaments, for long-range missiles, the Americans may ask the Saudis to curtail Chinese investment and involvement in huge infrastructure deals, and that's I'm willing to bet to that the Saudis will not consent. And so I don't see. I could see MBS and Netanyahu meeting at the White House, and everyone's going to say, "Wow, look at that!" But that's going to be a photo op that's going to dissipate less than 24 hours later. I don't, and there are confidence building measures, allowing El Al flights going to the Far East to fly over Saudi airspace and so on and so forth. But an Israeli embassy in Riyadh and normalization, I don't see that happening in the current political climate.
And anyway, the business deals and all the other connections can carry on even without formally shaking hands on the White House lawn. Well, yeah, because I don't want to go too. I don't want to delve back in history too deep right now. But both Israel and Saudi Arabia had abandonment fears once the U.S. began focusing on the Far East and the China challenge. Both Israel and the Saudis behaved quite hysterically as they saw signs of the Americans leaving the region. Let's not forget, both Israel then in 2015 and the Saudis objected vociferously to the JCPOA. Netanyahu went behind Obama and his vice president, Joe Biden, behind their back to speak in Congress. But the Saudi bankrolled a lot of the anti-JCPOA activities in Washington in 2014 and 2015, leading to the votes in Congress
in September of 15. Right now, both countries need to reassess their geopolitical situation and assume that America, while here physically to a degree, is losing interest, is disengaging, is not seeing the Middle East as an issue, a topic, or indeed a region of particular importance to American interests. It's all, maybe the Americans are exaggerating. I'm not saying they're not, but it's all about China, foreign policy-wise. It's all about China. Tomorrow something's going to happen in Taiwan. I don't think the word Israel or Saudi Arabia will be mentioned in Washington for years.
Thanks, Alon, for that. I'm going to mash up some of the questions that have been sent in with other questions that I had, so that we get a chance to give voice to some of the people that are here. Amos, if I can ask you a question. Do the actions of politicians like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who are obviously the far-right members of Netanyahu's coalition, do they pose as great a threat to Israel's security as Iran?
It's hard for me to say. I usually try to avoid such comparisons. I'd make the distinctions between the two of them, not that there's much of an ideological difference, but I think Ben-Gvir is mainly a clown. He's a troll. This is the way he appeared on our political arena around 30 years ago as a youngster, as a young Kahana follower. At that time, 16 or 17 years old. Later on, became a lawyer and activist supporting Jewish superiority or whatever, supremacy, and also quite behind the scenes, quite involved with racist sentiments in the Israeli public and so on, and a suspect of himself of being involved in all kinds of very, very violent actions. And he suddenly found himself, something that none of us would have believed 3 or 4 years ago, a minister, an important minister at the Netanyahu government and a member of the security cabinet. But it's quite clear right now that he's out of his depth completely. He doesn't know what to do. If there are more, thankfully, there's not too much terrorism right now. We've seen worst incidents 3 or 4 months ago. If there's another wave of massive Palestinian terrorist activity against Israelis, and there are many casualties on the Israeli side, he may find himself in a very problematic situation, because he might decide to leave the government altogether, and that will be the end of the Netanyahu coalition, in order to maintain the rest of his support. Because many of his supporters who voted for him voted for Otzma Yehudit, for his party, because they believed in his rhetoric and his promises to put an end to Palestinian terrorism or whatever. And this is obviously not the case. Not only is he absolutely helpless regarding this, he cannot deal with Arab on Arab crime, which is, under this government, becomes a more serious issue than it ever was before. Smotrich is a different case. He's also an extreme right-winger, but he has actual plans, and he knows what to do in order to implement them. He's not apparently he's not a very good finance minister, but this is not what his heart is interested in. He's mostly interested in his other job, which is being a second minister in the Ministry of Defense. And there, my colleague Yaniv Kubovich published a story about a month ago, quoting from some kind of a discussion at the MOD, where Smotrich tells the officials there that what he's about, what his intentions are to double the number of settlers in the West Bank. He wants 1 million Jews in the West Bank. That would be the end, of course, of the two-state solution, if that in fact is still a relevant scenario. But that's more than that. There's more than that. He actually speaks for years now of his intention to bring about the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. He wants them gone. For him, it's better to have Hamas in Gaza and have nothing left of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. So I see Smotrich as the most dangerous of the two. I think that Netanyahu found himself, as I mentioned before, because Netanyahu's main issue right now is no longer Iran. It's no longer trying to prevent a Palestinian state, what he was interested in 10 years ago. It's about his own personal survival and staying out of jail at the end of his criminal trials. And because of that, this is why he created those strange alliances with both Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who would never have played such an important part in the government unless Netanyahu was in such a difficult spot regarding his legal trials. And this is the reality. Iran is a different matter altogether. I would say that I think right now, I'm more concerned about our domestic struggles than I am about the strategic arena around Israel. The problem is that both of these trends converge in the end. Some of what we see right now, for instance, more Hezbollah provocations on the Lebanese border are happening because Hezbollah assumes that Israel is deeply focused on its domestic troubles and that Israel has less leeway or less room for military maneuvers or applying military force, considering the situation at home.
Thank you. Alon, I just want to open up another can of worms with you. A lot of people in the chat have been asking what is the impact of the Israeli pro-democracy protest movement sprouting wings and flying to the United States. There was quite a presence of both Israeli expats and American Jews at the Celebrate Israel parade in New York. There was quite a kind of constant circus because there were so many of the Netanyahu government MKs and ministers there, and each of them managed to, or so it seemed, trigger some kind of embarrassment or gaffe of one kind or another. And even when they're not there in the US, there seems to be some feeling that the Netanyahu government representatives are almost deliberately trying to sabotage relations both with the Biden White House and with the American Jewish community, at least its liberal majority. There have been all sorts of, quite crazy things that many of which you enumerated in your article that went up yesterday, including the use of anti-Semitic tropes that were then denounced by the Biden administration's anti-Semitism SAR. So we've really got to pretty much the bottom of the barrel here. Do you think this is some kind of game plan, this kind of deliberate sabotage, or is this just the result of having such a low quality and demagogic coalition? And just so that I can voice what some of the questions are, what is the role of those in the American Jewish community who are following what's happening here with great concern and engagement? Do they have any impact, and what is the best way for them to show that impact?
Okay, we can dedicate an hour just to discuss this set of issues, because there are American Jews, there are Israeli expats who have been heavily and extensively involved in these pro-democracy demonstrations as an arm or as some kind of, or linked to the protest movement in Israel. And there's the third issue which you emphasized, Esther, and that is the Israeli government's use of, the Israeli government's policy, the Netanyahu government's policy toward American Jews and those ministers that have caused embarrassment. These are three, I mean, it's all part of one package in terms of the topic, but these are three distinct issues. First of all, as for the Israeli expats, okay, there's a great article, if you haven't read it, read it, by Ben Samuels in today or yesterday, I don't remember, about the relationship, or the uneasy relationship, or the lack of understanding of common political objective between American Jews and Israeli expats who have not really been integrated into America, but don't live here. And there's this entire intricate relationship that is being developed. Look, I cannot judge and will not judge Israelis who want to join in protesting what's going on in Israel. This is not a political crisis. This is not an impasse. This is not one of those perennial coalition crises that everyone screams Gewalt and a month later it's all forgotten. This is a formative and defining moment, an inflection point, if you will, in Israel's history, after which a different Israel will emerge. Israel Model 1 or Israel Model 2. And it's perfectly okay for the Israeli expats to feel this way. They have family here, they have parents here. Many plan to come back here. Many have relocated because of advanced studies, graduate studies in the US and or high-tech jobs or in the financial sector. And so who am I, who are we to judge their sentiments, their emotions, and their drive to go out and vote for what they believe is a threat, an ominous and clear and present threat to Israeli democracy. Then there is American Jewry, and they feel, they're in a predicament of their own, feeling extraordinarily uncomfortable with what's going on. And I knew I'd ruffle some feathers by saying that many Jewish organizations have gone AWOL, but I think that I know the American Jewish community very well. A lot of people know them very well. I know them for many, many years in different positions. I understand the excruciating dilemmas that they're facing. This is a new reality. They need to change a mindset. They need to shift the paradigm, excuse me for mixing cliches. They need to think differently about Israel. Conventional bumper sticker types of slogans, we are one, Israel right or wrong, are no longer valid and now serve as some kind of a comfort zone or a denial zone in which they cocoon themselves and just stay away from Israel. Then there's the Israeli government. And you mentioned a few important points there, Esther, in terms of the majority of liberal Jews. Look, 80% of American Jews are Reform or conservative. The state of Israel has been discriminating against them, failing to recognize them, patronize them, dismiss them, and deride them. 75% of American Jews, on a multi-year average since polls have been taken in the presidential election of 1952, when Eisenhower ran against Adlai Stevenson, 75% of American Jews, on average, vote for Democrats. Why is a different story. There was this joke, about the Jews living like Episcopalians and voting like Puerto Ricans. It's politically incorrect to use that now, but for many years, that was the characterization. The Jews, in terms of their socio-political agenda, are more akin to the Puerto Ricans than they are to the Episcopalians, which financially and culturally they have come closer to. But here's the thing, Mr. Netanyahu deliberately, by design, severed ties with most American Jewry. He thinks of American Jewry as upper West Side liberal wusses who don't understand the difficulties and the threats that Israel face, and they're all bleeding heart liberals who don't get it, and Israel is under an existential threat. And he then introduced, Esther, his version of a replacement theory. Instead of the Jews, I have the evangelicals. There are only 5.6 million Jews in America. There are 75 million evangelicals in America. But with that affinity and affiliation came also an inevitable political decision. You need to dispense with the sacrosanct principle of bipartisanship. And so not only has he severed ties with the Democrats and undermined bipartisanship on Israel, he's aligned himself and his government squarely with the most extreme elements inside the Republican Party. And it went, in parallel lines ever since Netanyahu began this process in the mid-90s with Newt Gingrich, who was then Speaker of the House, and then into the Tea Party. It was anti-Clinton then. And then he aligned himself with the Republican Tea Party factions, but that was an anti-Obama thing. Then he aligned himself in this famous bromance with Donald Trump and essentially said, the hell with American Jews. I don't care how much American Jews hate Trump. Trump is a great guy. Okay. I don't want to comment on that right now. But the end result is that American Jews and Israeli expats feel alienated to a degree, not everyone, I'm generalizing, obviously. You can't avoid generalizing these kind of assessments. They feel alienated from this current Israel, run by this particular government. And when these, almost my friend called Ben Gvir a clown, there were 16 clowns in New York last week for the Israel Day Parade, the Support for Israel Parade. This is absurd. I was consul general in New York for 5 years. There was never more than two. There were never more than two, and one just happened to be there. One came purposely, and one just happened to be there. Two.
It's like junkets on steroids, basically.
It's worse than junket on steroids. I mean, I'm happy for Bloomingdale's and Macy's, but come on.
If you can understand why a very right-wing government, and especially Netanyahu with his history, has no great interest in cultivating love and care, but with liberal American Jews, why would he have so many ministers who are slamming the Biden administration when so many things that we've talked about this evening depend on the US pushing out the boat for Israel? And, just in the most immediate terms, Netanyahu is desperate for an invitation to the White House. But everything that we talked about Iran and Saudi Arabia, all pivots on the US. So what on earth is the political advantage to that?
Okay, my answer, and I beg forgiveness from the esteemed subscribers. My answer is inelegant and unacademic, because they're dumb. That's why. Because they don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking. They're reckless. They're irresponsible. They have no understanding of the consequences of what they're saying or doing. When the foreign minister of Israel dismisses the vice president of the US, Kamala Harris, saying she doesn't understand. She was the attorney general of the state of California, and before that, the district attorney of the city of San Francisco. But Eli Cohen, the constitutional scholar, says that Kamala Harris did not understand the judicial reform. Calling this thing, calling it judicial reform, and I saw a member of Knesset Rothman, his famous, brawl with a protester in New York over the loudspeaker, the megaphone. You would expect them to be at least considerate of Netanyahu's problem. But you know what? In the end, I don't fault these ministers. They don't know better. I blame the person who appointed them, who fails to rein them in, and then blames whomever except himself for the
mostly the left-wing traitorous media, as far as I understand.
Oh yeah, them too. Yeah.
So I just want one final question, which again is a wrap-up of some of the questions here. Now, obviously, and this is for both of you, Amos, if you can start. The US has been, its attention has been captured this week, obviously, by Trump's arraignment and now trial for holding national security secrets. There was some chatter that perhaps there was some of those secrets might have been related to Israel's own sensitive intelligence. But in terms of what the Netanyahu government, or Netanyahu himself, let's say, is he hoping for a different Republican candidate or is he hoping that Trump makes it through? Bearing in mind, since those days of the bromance, Trump has used some pretty spicy language about Netanyahu, but can we all just forget that? Or, between what kind of horizon would Netanyahu most like out of the next year and a half in the States?
Look, first of all, part of Netanyahu, I'm not sure that there's a Netanyahu strategy anymore. He plays it by ear and he hopes to live to see another day in politics. Exactly. But other than that, looking forward, it's quite clear, Alona's discussed that in the beginning of our session. It's quite clear that he's biding his time. He's playing for time and kicking the can down the road when it comes to the judicial overhaul. And part of this has to do with his hope that suddenly at least half of his problems go away if a Republican candidate wins in come November 24. Would he like that to be Trump or somebody like DeSantis? Look, there was a period of time where they were close. I don't think that there was any love lost to begin with. I think Trump is incapable of liking anybody else but Trump himself. But I think that the interview Trump gave to our colleague Barak Ravid, an ex-Haaretz writer, for his book, it's now in English, I think it's called Trump's Peace, that was quite brutal, the way he talked about Netanyahu. And this was mostly because Netanyahu, in the end, was forced to call President Biden and congratulate him for his victory. I think it took, correct me if I'm wrong, Alon, it took some time. But he had to. He
was not amongst the first, definitely.
Yeah, while Trump was denying, of course, his loss, and Trump never forgave him for that. Could these guys work together again? Of course they can, because it's politics, and they will at one point or another. And Netanyahu would never come out publicly against the possibility of Trump being reelected, and we'll hear all that nonsense about Trump being our best ally and best friend and so on. But other than that, if I could guess, I haven't talked to any of Netanyahu's people about that. It's quite clear that that the best possibility for him, of course, is for Biden to lose, but not for Trump. Another Trump presidency, it would be a nightmare for the U.S. for various reasons, but I think it would also be a nightmare from a Middle East point of view. I think Netanyahu would probably prefer somebody, somebody he can work with, somebody he's more familiar with, and somebody who he can guess where he's heading. There's always a surprise with Trump. And remember, we sometimes jokingly refer to Netanyahu as the Republican senator from Jerusalem, or from Rehavia. That's his, this is his home terrain, if you'd like, more than Israel is in many ways. So if there's a dream candidate that hasn't appeared, he or she has not appeared yet, on the GOP side, you'd probably prefer that to going through the Trump ordeal again. But of course, he'll never say that publicly.
Sure. Alon, but you only have 1 minute.
Well, same question, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, I in which case I'd like to question the premise of the question. What would Netanyahu want? Okay, let's do the math. The American presidential election is on the 5th of November, 2024. That's a year and 5 months from now. Would my good friend Amos be willing to bet whether or not Mr. Netanyahu will be prime minister at that time? I don't know. I honestly don't know. The Republican.
We'll put money on this after the Zoom.
Yeah. The Republican primary process is still months ahead of us. The Republican convention in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is only in the summer of 2024, a year, just 13 months, a year and 1 month from now. So I don't think, if I were Netanyahu, I would invest everything I have in trying to mend relations with Biden. Instead, he's done the absolute and exact opposite with the introduction of this constitutional assault and the ministers. And I'm done because you said I only have 1 minute.
Thank you for being so precise with the timing. And that actually brings our discussion to an end. Thank you very much, Amos and Alon. And thank you very much to everyone who has been listening. Just a reminder, you can not only see the news as it comes through on your mobile or on your desktop, but you can sign up for newsletters and news alerts for your favorite authors, whom I hope now obviously include Amos and Alon. You can also send gift subscriptions through the link that's in the chat box. And this is only one in a whole series of briefings. And our next one is on July the 25th. And that will be with Haaretz Deputy Editor-in-Chief Noah Landau. And more details about that will be emailed to you in the coming weeks. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you. Come on.